What happens when we stop trying to be the expert in the room and start approaching teaching with genuine curiosity? In this episode, you will hear how presence, connection, and even failure can shape the way we teach and lead. These insights may change the way you think about your classroom. Welcome to Speaking of Higher Ed. I'm Andrew Everett, and this is episode 37, the first episode of season 4. Beginning with this episode, we are introducing a new feature called the Continuing the Conversation activity. This optional resource is designed to help you reflect on the episode and walk away with a meaningful takeaway. You can sign up to receive it by selecting the Continuing the Conversation button on our show page at augusta.edu/innovation/SOHE. In today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Bonni Stachowiak. She reflects on what years of speaking with educators have taught her, why curiosity matters now more than ever, and how faculty can strengthen their work in practical and meaningful ways. Jeff Mastromonico has this conversation.
My guest today is Dr. Bonni Stachowiak. Dr. Stachowiak is Dean of Teaching and Learning and Professor of Business and Management at Augusta University of Southern California. She hosts Teaching in Higher Ed, which is a weekly podcast on the art and science of teaching with over 5 million downloads. Dr. Stachowiak holds a doctorate in organizational leadership and speaks widely on teaching, curiosity, digital pedagogy, and leadership. She often joins her husband, Dave, on the Coaching for Leaders podcast, and they're currently raising 2 endlessly curious kids. Dr. Stachowiak, welcome to Speaking of Higher Ed.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and excited for the conversation.
Yeah, we are as well. So we like to start by asking our guests how they got to where they are currently in their career. So if you would, tell us about the path that led you to Vanguard and creating your own podcast.
In some ways, it's 2 different paths. And I know many people who start a podcast do so affiliated with their institution. And in my case, it was quite different. So I'll start with kind of the path that led me to Vanguard, and then I'm sure we'll get into more about how the podcast came about. But in terms of Vanguard, I was working at the time, this is more than 2 decades ago, I was working for the University of California, Irvine. And to this day, it's just a wonderful organization. I have such fond memories of that time. I was working on the staff side, so I was working in organizational development, and an opportunity came before me to go and be a full-time tenure track professor. And this was something I couldn't even ever imagine in my whole entire life. And I kept thinking, C means security and safety, although I don't actually think we ever have that. I just think sometimes my small pea-sized brain makes me think I have that. But it was kind of one of those wow, I really enjoyed teaching, and that seems amazing, but it also seems scary and like a big risk on every sense of the word. I also wasn't married yet. I was dating my now husband of more than 20 years, but it just felt like a scary thing, but it also felt like an exciting and exhilarating thing. So I am a teacher at heart, and I really enjoyed my time as a full-time professor. I did go on to achieve the dream, I say somewhat sarcastically, of tenure, and I'm a full tenured professor at my university. So I sort of climbed those mountains. I'm really mixing my metaphors here, but I enjoyed that time. But now I serve, in terms of my career, 75% of my job, if we could ever divide things into percentages, is more on the leadership end of things. And 25%, I'll always keep it as teaching, because I love getting to teach. I love getting to work alongside students at such pivotal times in their lives. I consider it an absolute fortune. And I'm sure we'll talk more about the podcast and how it came about as well.
Well, yeah, that actually was going to be my next question then. So what then led you to launch Teaching in Higher Ed?
So this is back in the early months of 2014. And my husband had started his podcast, Coaching for Leaders, 3 years prior to that. We both laugh at our sort of naive innocence at like, oh my gosh, should we spend money? Back then, I feel like an old person about to tell a story about when we used to go and walk uphill to school in the snow, both directions, but at the time, a lot more of podcasting was hardware based. So if you wanted to have good sound, which really matters because podcasting is such an intimate medium, you had to buy the big box, set it on your desk, and then there was another big box and set it on your desk. And at the time, we followed someone whose name was the Podcast Answer Man, and that name just still cracks me up. What a great brand! And so we decided as a family to invest in this course about how to start a podcast and to invest in this hardware. And again, we just chuckle and chuckle and chuckle at that. And so my husband did have such a good experience with launching his Coaching for Leaders podcast. And then he kept saying to me early 2014, he'd say, "You love talking about teaching. You're so curious about teaching. You also should start a podcast." And so that's how Teaching in Higher Ed came about.
So when you launched this, did you was it more than just kind of the love of talking about teaching, or did you see a gap that could possibly be filled by this?
I laugh because I have on occasion, I've gone back and listened to the early episodes. I would say that, there's some that don't land. And then there's some where I go, wow, you kind of tripped over something, as in you had zero clue what you were doing and zero idea about what was happening there. But I think because I thought so much about teaching and I had a natural curiosity, I think human beings are naturally curious, just kind of have to spark it and point it in a direction. But I was very curious. I sort of happened upon some ideas that I think stand the test of time, but I had no clue what I was doing, Jeff, no clue. I mean, I wish I had it documented when I read Ken Bain's What the Best College Teachers Do, but I remember it was certainly that year. I just can't pinpoint exactly, when in the year it was. But just to go, oh my gosh, here's a man. And for listeners who aren't aware of this, just passed away in recent months. And so there's a lot of celebrations of his life and the legacy that he leaves behind for so many of us. But that was another really formative thing of going, teaching is not just an art. It is an art. I truly believe it is. I don't think you could have taught and not think, this thing is not like some recipes at some, eating establishments that you can be reasonably assured of the output. I mean, certainly it is an art, but it certainly can be a science as well. And so the scholarship of teaching and learning, that was one of my earliest introductions to those things. But I would say, was I some wise sage, that saw some vast gap? No, I was a curious person who didn't know what the heck I was talking about, but who certainly was fortunate early on to meet some people who really did.
Well, that leads me to my next question. You have talked to so many educators on teaching in higher ed. Over that time, were there any themes that maybe stood out about effective teaching?
Yes, this is one of those questions that's difficult to answer, but it's hard because doing this for all of these years, and I'm a streaks person, so every single week, whether there's a holiday, whether it is here in the United States, the summertime for us, it's just I'm a streak, and I keep going and everything. It's because I'm almost afraid I'll forget something, but I definitely have considered this, and I think a lot of this comes down to presence, being present for what is right before us. And that can mean a lot of different things. So our students, being present for them, what does that mean to be present for them? I have written a book about productivity, and I also think the word productivity is kind of icky because it can really just reduce us down to widgets or reduce us down to some, formulaic, I don't know. But really, if you feel a sense of mission around what you're doing, it matters that you can show up for it. So I definitely think a presence for educators, and then also an ability to cultivate relationships that aren't just about you. So not just the one-to-one relationships, which are really important and so treasured, but how do we cultivate things so that relationships have an opportunity to emerge? I recently gave a workshop as part of the Pod Network Conference, and it was playing a game that I created that's about artificial intelligence and metaphors. And one of the things that was so delightful after our 3 hours together was seeing people exchanging contact information and staying after the workshop had ended because, and really plan, how are we going to keep these relationships that just got formed going? And to me, that, I mean, it's the greatest gift as an educator, because I could be at my weakness when I put so much pressure on myself. I failed at that because I couldn't show up and be everything to everyone. No one can show up and be everything to everyone, but we can cultivate these relationships. So I'm very rooted in people's research, such as Peter Felton has done a lot around relationship-rich education. There are a lot of other people who have as well. And that helps me feel even more that sense of mission, but also feel less pressure, less of that sort of pride-filled pressure of like, I have to show up and be, Jessamine Newhouse calls this the myth of the superhero professor. It's like, I'm going to come in, I'm probably wearing a cape of some kind, all those kinds of things. And I think the last big, broad theme that comes to mind for me falls under the bucket of lots of things aren't what they seem at first. So I mentioned starting the podcast. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And then guess what? Many of us, I'm going to argue, all of us didn't have a clue what we were doing as a global pandemic hit us. And myself didn't have a clue what I was doing in terms of grades and feedback. And I didn't have the critical thought capacity to be able to question things that I had been so indoctrinated in my own experiences, but also my educational experiences are relatively unimpressive. I do not mean to offend the schools that I went to, but back when I went to them, they've grown over time to become, more impressive than when I went there. Certainly my credentials have grown over that time, but I have modest educational background. And even then, like, I can't even fathom what it would be like to go to an Ivy League school or, some of the other, people who have had different educational experiences. We've really been socialized to believe a lot of wrong-headed things about learning, about relationships, and I go back to the writing that I've done about productivity. Like, there's just so many wrong-headed things. And so but wrong-headed things, if you try to fight wrong-headed things with just ego and pride and a banking model of education, you don't really get what you want. So I've really found a spirit of curiosity as one that I think can cure a lot of things within myself that are real weaknesses, as well as and maybe cure is too strong a word, alleviate, moderate the challenges that we human beings have about thinking we're right more often than we actually are.
Yeah, when you mentioned productivity, that actually the first place that my mind went to was the banking model that you just mentioned, and just kind of being stuck in this is the way I was reared. The teacher is up there and she just kind of inputs the knowledge, and you don't question it. Now as an older person that's been in higher ed for a while too, you start learning more about student-centered design and just how important it is to maybe change things up. And it feels weird and it feels icky to do that, at some level. But the benefit is for everybody involved is there. So yeah, that was an interesting point. So out of all these conversations, is there one maybe specifically that kind of stands out that has changed your own teaching over time?
Yeah, I want to pick up on the word that you just used because I really like the word icky.
Yeah,
and because it's
I use it too often. But.
No, it's just delightful. It's such a delightful word. It's so hard with these things that we learn because like I mentioned earlier, it's not a recipe. And even if it were, recipes don't really work the way that we think they're going to. I've never been a baker. I'm not much of a chef. My husband, if he ever listens to this, has just laughed out loud, by the way, at the understatement of what I've just said. But I can remember, and this is not that long ago, like I should have known better, but so it's sort of an embarrassing story, but I thought it sounded delicious to make some blueberry bread. And that just sounded delicious to me. And so I thought like, oh, okay, well, it might have even been possibly during our earlier years of COVID, because I remember we got a bread maker because that's what you were supposed to do, as you're, trapped inside your house. It seemed like that was going to cure something. Definitely. So we have a bread maker that sits there and doesn't get used. But I thought, oh, okay, I'm following the recipe. So I put the stuff in, and then the blueberries, and then I was supposed to have the ingredients, but like I didn't have. I can't even now remember if it's what it is that makes bread rise, but it was baking soda or baking powder. But I didn't have one of those two things. But I only needed a tiny amount, so I was like, well, who among us doesn't have all the ingredients? I'll just leave that out. How important could that be? Those of you who do bake, even on the most basic level, are going to realize exactly how this story ends. But also, I thought, oh well, in terms of creating this, I don't really want to sit there and stir because I have really bad wrists. So I was like, well, I'll just put it in our blender/food processor and just mix that up. Well, blueberries blended aren't blueberries anymore. They are purple mesh. It's like, obviously, so the bread never rose. It tasted terrible. The texture was all off. And so how have the conversations changed my teaching over time? It is to recognize that things get messy, and sometimes messy's bad. If you were trying to make blueberry bread that day, you haven't succeeded. But if you're trying to learn how to bake, sometimes if you accidentally got it right the first time, you actually haven't really learned. You might have just lucked your way into seeming like a person who has learned. That is actually by our failures that, when provided with correct information, actually connects our the neural connections in our brain actually get formed tighter. I had the wonderful opportunity of talking to Robert Bjork, and Robert and his wife lead a memory lab at the University of California, Los Angeles. And he has this wonderful quote, which I love, that I know by heart: forgetting is the friend of learning. And so we can get really embarrassed, myself very much included, as we imagine, oh my gosh, what is it like to look like a fool in front of all these people who now know I don't know the difference between baking powder and baking soda. Doesn't everyone know the difference between baking powder and baking soda? Jeff is shaking his head for anyone listening.
I know one keeps the cat smells away and one,
Yes. So as humans, we don't like to fail. Even if it's like, who cares if she doesn't know, what the difference is? So But the memory researchers, they've studied, and they've named this either the testing effect or retrieval practice, that actually by forgetting, it's a friend of learning, because given that we're then presented with the right information, those neural connections just get tighter, and the next time we can get to it that much quicker. So I can remember standing up in front of, I think, 300 or 400 faculty in Texas, and forgetting, irony of ironies, Robert Bjork's name. And once again, feeling like a fool, like, oh my gosh, all these people are just going to think like, what did we do bringing this woman out here? Can we get a refund, for our money and all of those things? By the way, for anyone feeling too sorry for me, humans like to see other humans being human. So when we're faculty, we're teaching, it feels so embarrassing to fail, and yet when we show up as fully human, we're really modeling how learning works so that others might have the courage and vulnerability to go through the process of actually learning deeply, profoundly, and being transformed by our experiences. So yes, I definitely stood up there. Yes, I definitely couldn't remember Robert Bjork's name, but today I can say it to Jeff without hesitation, because that path is really, really well formed
It's been built, yeah.
in my brain. Yeah. And so I guess in terms of how they've shaped me, it's easier for me to show up. I'm not saying it's easy. It is easier to show up than was I traveling down a path to be the smartest person in the world versus I'd love to often be one of the most curious people in the room. And I love doing that in podcasting. I love doing that in my teaching, and I love doing that in my life.
It's so interesting that you bring up failure too. And, we were talking about feeling icky. And, I think some people or even some educators are uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of gamification and things like that in our center. And one of the big takeaways has always been allowing the students to learn from failure. It's a big gamification principle. We just did an escape room where probably half of the students that were part of it made it out. And so the opportunity to fail really gave them a chance to reflect on the why and everything like that. And again, made it, I think, a more memorable experience. So that was just very interesting that you brought that up. And I definitely believe in that and learning from failure. So let's take a shift and talk a little bit about some faculty development. So from your perspective as Dean of Teaching and Learning, what do faculty, in your opinion, need most right now to thrive?
I have a paradox I would like to share. So I'm going to answer it with two things that it feels like can't possibly be true at the same time. So the idea that we need to be more gentle with ourselves, I think, is so crucial. As we look at the research that we have around mental health, this is not something that only our students are struggling with. And so I guess what I would wish for myself, what I would wish for everyone is just to be more gentle with ourselves. We have experienced as individuals so much trauma, and then as cultures and societies and communities so much trauma. And so I'm thinking about the ability that we might have to be gentle with ourselves. And yet, so that's not, this is not a but, this is an and. And I think we need to continue to become better at living in the uncomfortable, as you mentioned, living that, taking some risks, to stop pursuing perfectionism for perfectionism's sake, and to try to find ways to interrupt what can permeate so many of our organizations of learned helplessness. It's really easy to sit back, and there's a quote that is in one of Brene Brown's books, but she's quoting a former president. And speaking of retrieval practice, never mention a quote that you can't remember. Was it Woodrow Wilson? Anyway, it's about being in the arena and just kind of you're sitting out there and you're just kind of watching all the stuff happen versus the contrast of like actually being in the arena. And like, yeah, it's going to get a little messy in there. I think you're going to get some mud on your shirt for sure. And that really we're dealing with some really wicked problems in higher education. Wicked problems don't have easy button answers. And so how are we going to wrestle through these and find the action-filled hope that is necessary toward better being able to fulfill our mission? I think it is by being willing to get a little messy.
So in your working with faculty, are there strengths that you often see in that faculty that maybe they don't see or recognize in themselves?
I got to talk to James Lang. He wrote a wonderful piece about tending our gardens. And for those not familiar with James Lang, a lot of his works, I mean, my gosh, it's hard to not oversimplify, but he was an English professor for many years and is now a practicing professor in that area as well. And so he's been teaching a long time. And he talks about his piece is in response to the continued emergence of artificial intelligence and how much this has caused so many of us to just have our identities get bumped up against and, not really know what we're doing. And by the way, anybody who tells you that they know what they're doing probably hasn't thought enough or isn't reading enough. I think about the Dunning-Kruger effect, where when you actually learn about something, it's then that you realize, I know nothing about this, and if you're not reading, I'm not trying to sound arrogant here, but I probably read 10 articles a day about artificial intelligence, and I can tell you emphatically, I know nothing about AI. So if you also are not reading at least 10 articles or blog posts or whatever about AI a day, I could guarantee you also don't know what you're talking about, as well as me and so many others. So when I think about what we as faculty might not recognize in ourselves, that I felt so nourished to read in James Lang's words, is his assurance. You've been tending this garden. You've been tending it. You know this garden. His metaphor was an attempt for us to slow ourselves down. It feels like when we read the discourse about artificial intelligence, whether it is someone who is extremely critical on one very extreme of a very complex, gnarly continuum, or it's someone who wants to hack their way into, higher education, is going to be full of, by the way, I'm totally reducing these two extreme perspectives down to something that sounds like I don't respect them at all. I actually really enjoy reading some of these extreme opinions, but I like reading them in amongst other more nuanced perspectives as well, because the nuanced ones aren't the ones that are going to get the clicks and the eyeballs. So I read his words and I thought, yes, it's a garden. And with a garden, we need fertilizer. With a garden, we plant seeds. And there's the sun, there's the rain, there's time. And there isn't an easy button to say AI is either going to end us all as we know it, or it's going to fix us, in a few clicks of the mouse. It's okay to go slow. Don't not move at all. That's not what he implies, but we don't have to move as fast as the industry would have us or the extreme critics would have us. So we've been tending our gardens for a while, and we can reflect and recognize that learning happens. The best, most transformative learning happens across many, many experiences, most of them outside of our classrooms, and across time. And hopefully we're still learning as well.
And so I'll bring up, we are familiar with James Lang, and you in teaching in higher ed have two, that I've heard anyway, two great episodes with James Lang, one on cheating and why students cheat, and I think the last one that I heard was on writing, maybe associated with Greek literature or Greek mythology, and so I would recommend both of those. They were both fantastic. So you mentioned AI, so there's a big concern right now about the impact AI is going to have in the classroom. So as a dean who leads faculty and leads faculty development, what are you doing maybe to help faculty move from a place of policing AI to maybe more of a place about being curious about AI?
I'll start by being frank that it feels like we aren't quite where we, quote, ought to be. So I don't know that anyone's going to come and visit us and say, wow, these people really have things figured out over here. But I will say that for me, at my institution, it's by going slower than I think people want us to. So we did have a book club last semester on John Warner's book, which, of course, I say it all the time. And now, since you just mentioned James Lang's book, their two book titles have gone and had a baby together. So I'm like, right, like you teach is James Lang's books. And now I'm trying to get my neural connections back to John Warner. It'll come to me, of course, as soon as we hang up this piece. But we had a lovely time talking about that. But that book looks at teaching writing in an age of AI. And for some of my colleagues, it was like, well, that's not enough, and that's not fast enough, and that's not really what I was looking for. So it's kind of like we have to be a little bit patient, that of course people are going to be frustrated. So it's okay. I can hold that anger that it didn't feel like enough. Didn't feel like enough to me either, in terms of we're not going to solve all the challenges that are out there by reading a single book together. So our next path launches in January of 2026, and we're excited to launch a book that looks at academic integrity specifically. It's called The Opposite of Cheating, and it draws from James Lang's earlier book, Cheating Lessons, as well as lots of experience from the authors in the world of academic integrity. And so for me, it's holding space for other people's anger. Of course, we're going to be angry. None of us asked for this. None of us asked for this. So I think it's important to be able to sit with people who are angry. That's okay. That's okay. Let's talk about it. Tell me more. Tell me more about what you're experiencing. Take me inside your classroom. Metaphorically speaking, tell me what's going on in there. Tell me more about the anger. And so I think we have to be able to sit with that and not be patronizing, not say, let me fix this for you and tell you why you shouldn't be worried, or shouldn't be angry and all the things. A way, I think, of shifting the focus does come back to that element of curiosity. And how might we get past our polarized views that are it's very easy because the headlines are all driving us toward this or that. Pick one or the other. Dichotomous thinking. And I don't think what our institutions need is more dichotomous thinking. I think what our institutions need is more curiosity, and curiosity about others' viewpoints, which at first seem so different than ours. But when we sit and don't succumb to our impatience, but instead lean into our curiosity, we can actually find out that often there are a lot of shared values there. Can we come to a sense of purpose? And then, yes, we do see that so differently, but curiosity evokes such more effective human maneuvers than fear or anger, which anger is so often just a cover up that our bodies, our minds, try to play tricks on us and we think it's actually anger, but it's actually a lot of it's fear. And so can we get curious? Yeah. Can we get curious about others' perspectives? And I found that to be incredibly helpful to me in my conversations it's mostly through workshops and speaking engagements that I do, in terms of, those are strangers. So I'm much less scary I don't mean that I'm scary to people that I work with, because that's in fact not true either. But, we're wrestling through it together. You know what I mean? We're wrestling through it together. And even though I'll tell people I don't have all the answers, whether it's on the podcast or whether I come and visit your campus, sometimes they still don't believe you, even if you say that, because you just seem like this authority figure versus where you work. They're very clear. I don't have all the answers, and we're just coming together and we're grappling with this. And I think that's a really important paradigm to put ourselves in, even if we are listening to more podcasts and reading more than our colleagues about these issues. They still are such rich resources to come together and have these conversations.
So I'm sure what you hear, and I know what we hear a lot when it comes to AI is, if AI can eventually handle the grading, the syllabus generation, and the basic content delivery, what's left? What's left for us? How do those conversations go for you if you're having them with your faculty?
Well, in terms of our faculty, we haven't had those conversations yet. I think we need to have a great reckoning about grading at my institution. And I've had so many conversations on the podcast and read so much and listened to so many other podcasts about grading. And I think this question almost, it assumes a shared definition of grading that I don't think we have in higher ed, but I think we have it in higher ed. So to say that AI could handle grading, I would want to get curious about, well, what do you mean by grading? Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier about a really big place that I've changed and that has been a profound theme across teaching in higher ed all these years is just really questioning, what is grading for? I recently signed up for Brilliant. I don't know if it's brilliant.com or brilliant.ai. I forget the last part of it, but it's a little bit more geared toward younger people than me, but it also, some of their services are geared toward, lifelong learners. But it's a gamified website that teaches you things about math and about computer science. And they have maybe 30 or so different courses you can take. And so I'm doing this as a lifelong learner. I know that I have left, let's just say, some math lessons behind from long ago that have many cobwebs on them. And so I have no desire to cheat. What would be the incentive to cheat? And so I'm figuring out for me, like, when does it make sense to pull out a calculator, or where is the calculator actually reducing friction to an extent that you're actually defeating the purpose of this? And the other sort of medium between pulling a calculator out, which I, by the way, haven't done very often in case anyone's horrified, or I will also, mostly what I'll do these days, I think when I write. So I'll grab a screenshot of a problem that it's asking me to solve, and then I'll put it into an app on my iPad that I can then write on with my Apple Pencil. And I can generally get the answers right more often if I'm able to sort of scribble my way to what the answer might be in all of those things. So it'll tell me if I got the answer right or wrong. So that in a sense is grading. Mm-hmm. If I got an answer wrong and I click, it will tell me why I got it wrong. But one could imagine how much more I might benefit if I actually had someone who I could talk to, who knew me, who had a relationship with me, who, dare I say, cared about me as a person and my own growth. The artificial intelligence, actually, in this particular case, is probably not artificial intelligence that's doing this part of it, because it is just multiple choice. And then it's just, it's simple, like, programming that's allowing this to take place. But we can't take the human out of all of these things, even when it is more efficient in this particular case on this lesson to tell me if I got that individual question right or wrong. So I think in terms of your question, we have a lot of work we need to do about what grading needs, what grading means, what purpose grading serves, and then who might best serve those various functions of grading. And that's just one example. You also used a syllabus as an example. Mm-hmm. Can artificial intelligence help us with some aspects of our syllabus? I recently spoke with Jose Bowen. Jose Bowen and Eddie Watson are coming out with a second edition of their book about teaching with artificial intelligence. And he was talking about, for himself, in terms of syllabus creation, it might help surface non-Western sources for things. So it can kind of mitigate the bias that he knows he himself has in terms of things like choosing readings and videos and things like that, while also recognizing the bias is baked into these large language models. They're trained on humans, and humans possess bias, and so ergo we end up with biased tools. But can you circumvent that bias to discover things that might help you expand beyond your own bias? Was that so? I think we have to avoid, with the question of artificial intelligence, doing too much of that dichotomous thinking. It either does your syllabus or it doesn't. It either grades for you or it doesn't. It either does content delivery or it doesn't. There's a whole lot left for humans to do in the mix. I think an important step for us is going to be really defining our terms.
Yeah, and I think, too, is just kind of learning at some level how to embrace it, and that there are ways to use this as a tool, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one that's taking our jobs away. As a visual designer, it definitely comes up for me that, oh my gosh, here's this thing that can create what sometimes takes me hours to draw and things like that, and where is there a place for me? But there's also ways that I can brainstorm and all these other things and learn how to use that tool. I'll add again that there are a lot of great episodes of your podcast that talk about AI. I'm not going to remember the guest, but there's one. Maybe you were discussing writing, but he makes a great metaphor. I guess comparing AI to Tang, and where
that was John Warner. That was
okay.
John Warner.
Was it John Warner? I thought that was great. First off, being as old as I am, that somebody mentioned Tang, and I was very excited about it. But, comparing Tang and orange juice, and Tang's pretty good, but orange juice, is a lot better for all kinds of other reasons. So I just thought that was a great metaphor to use And so another great episode if our listeners are able to go and check that out. To shift back to working with faculty, as you are working with faculty, what practices or habits do you feel would help faculty grow through their careers?
What has helped me the most, and what I center so much of the workshops that I lead and faculty development efforts that I lead, comes from Stephen Brookfield. And for people not familiar, Stephen Brookfield has written more than 30 books about teaching in higher ed, and has just been a wonderful mentor from a distance for so many of us that have had the opportunity to see him speak. In my case, talk to him a number of times for the podcast or read his treasured books. He talks about becoming. We are never done learning whatever it is we might learn about teaching. And so for me, it's gosh, don't think about it as a fixed mindset that either you are inherently, naturally a teacher or you're not. And don't think about it as, well, I came to X number of workshops or I read X number of books and now I am done learning about teaching. I have finished, I've conquered this thing that is teaching. So in terms of the
Moving
practice.
on to baking blueberry muffins.
Exactly. So in terms of practice or habit, is a habit of beginner's mind. And even if you think, I guess I just haven't experienced that, so I've never really met anybody who's read a lot about teaching and for whom it doesn't become even more of a, not formulaic endeavor. It is an art and a science, but it's messy. All of that is very, very, very messy. And so just this idea that continually becoming. And then when we find areas where we have allowed stinking thinking to occur in our minds, by stinking thinking, I mean things like, I'm not good at that. So sometimes people will tell me, I'm just not good at technology, just not good at it. Mm-hmm. And I will work with them, whether it's a student that says that or a fellow colleague. And I'll do this a little more gently than our time affords us today, Jeff. I will listen, tell me more. I don't just come at them. But ultimately, I try to lead us to a conversation to, can we shift that language a bit such that it could change your entire outlook, therefore your outcomes? I am becoming a person who uses technology too. I am becoming a person who uses technology too. I just did it with a student this semester. I'm just not good at technology, just not good at it. Teaching a class called Personal Leadership and Productivity. I teach in a business school here. I can't have people graduating from college who have never used a digital calendar and invited another human being to come to a meeting. I can't do that. That's a career limiting move, I can tell you right now, given the percentage of businesses who use, digital calendars or a digital project management tool or whatever. So I was gentle with her at first in that I listened to her, because I know some of this is from when we have struggled, what is it that helped us? And in her case, when she struggled, it's by writing things down, in a book. That's what she learned, in a planner. So far be it for me to insult all things analog, because that's not at all my intention in this. So we talked about that. And I mentioned the times when I find analog tools helpful. I pointed her to a couple of, thinkers who may be useful to her in her own analog planning. But I also then came out with the challenge, because that's what Sarah Rose Kavanaugh talks about. We, in terms of mental health for youth, in her book, Mind Over Monsters, we need to support and encourage our students. So she says, yes, that's what her research says. That's what her experience tells her. Yes, support, but also challenge. So I left her with that challenge, and I literally had her repeat back to me, not as condescending it's about to sound, but I said, I want you to repeat, I am becoming a person who uses technology too. And then she got to fill in the blank, and it was really powerful. So
we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with our continuing the conversation question.
Got a teaching idea worth sharing? Share it on AU Teaching Comments. We are Augusta University's first peer-reviewed hub of open teaching resources by faculty for faculty. Share your knowledge, help your peers, impact students. Visit us at guides.augusta.edu/AU Teaching Commons.
And we're back, and we are going to ask our continuing the conversation question. What is one simple habit faculty could try this week to strengthen their teaching or maybe support their students more effectively?
Presumably people have been listening now for some time, so I'm going to say this with all the warmness that is intended. Stop talking and start asking. And one of the ways that's helped me over many decades now of teaching is what's called the 8-second rule. And you ask a question, maybe it's the first day of class or your first time meeting this group that you are so privileged to teach. You ask a question, and by the way, you don't ask a question and then go, is it A, or is it B, or is it C, or is it D? Ask a bold question, ask a concise question, and stop talking and start in your head counting 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. You will be very unlikely to ever get to 8 seconds because you are totally manipulating the people in that room, but it's for a very good cause. You're using the social pressure that very much dislikes silence to actually help the group realize and really help yourself realize that you are not asking a rhetorical question. You actually are inviting an answer. And I would say even stronger than inviting, you're urging an answer. And the vast majority of the time, you will get an answer. Now, there are exceptions I find when I teach online. It can be frequent that I have to wait longer than 8 seconds. And a lot of that comes from a lot of different dynamics. But I think a lot of that comes from us just really having trained people that sadly, if you're going to show up to an online session, we're actually not interested in hearing from you. So it takes longer to get there. You're not going to have to wait that long once you condition the group. And by the way, don't tell them this, because if you tell them this, then they'll start messing with you, which I have most definitely had happen and get such funny delights around those memories. So they will try to mess with you if you try to mess with them. So maybe don't mention this to them. But once you've conditioned the group that, oh, this is actually a person who, when they ask a question, they actually want us to answer. And they're not just doing it for rote purposes so they can hear more of themselves talk. So that's a huge habit. I wanted to say before we close, Jeff, that the trouble with a lot of these things, when you say, what's a thing I could do, is that because we teach humans and because humans are messy, you often don't get to see the success of your results until what first appears to be failure. If you try the 8-second rule, you're probably nervous like me. I get nervous at the start of every single class. I've been doing this for so long. Every single class, I still get nervous. So the nervousness is there. And then you're going, okay, well, she told us to stop talking and start asking. So I asked a question. She said I wasn't going to have to wait the 8 seconds. And it was the most awkward moments of my life. It's like, because humans are messy. And humans, ourselves included, by the way, will naturally resist engaging, even though we yearn for engagement at the core of our beings. So we have to overcome that resistance, which is really fear. Fear that sometimes gets disguised as apathy. Fear that sometimes gets disguised as irritation. How dare you make me talk in this, whatever it is. And I recently got to talk with David Gublar about his most recent book. And he was talking about that he has this tradition he uses to start with a question every class. And some of the questions are kind of silly, like, is a hot dog a hamburger, or is a hot dog a sandwich, or or what's the best, whatever. Like he has, I mean, some of them are silly, some of them are meaningful. And at first he does get resistance from his students. Come on, man. I just got out of traffic. What are you doing? This is not his description, but he gets that resistance, but he knows on the other side of it, there's such goodness there that are waiting. So when we start these techniques, we often stop them too soon before we see the fruits of our labor and our risk that we took to be vulnerable enough to sit in the awkwardness. But boy, if you build a culture that shows that you actually can submit your own desire to pour your vast knowledge into these precious brains and actually look to discover what is inside of those precious brains, either because you're using retrieval practice to help them form the neural connections that I talked about earlier, or because you actually believe that you don't possess all of the knowledge that exists in your discipline's domain. Like imagine that. Imagine if you teach math or you teach English or you teach journalism or whatever it is, the idea that we could humble ourselves intellectually and realize the power of what happens when you've got a lot of magnificent human brains together and humble ourselves and get curious about what we might learn in addition to what we might teach.
Well, Dr. Stachowiak, how can people connect with you on your own social media?
Well, I would say the easiest one is to connect with me every single week, which I've told you I'm a Streaks person, is to pull out whatever your podcast player is, or if you're a Spotify person, whatever, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, and search for Teaching in Higher Ed and hit follow or subscribe or whatever that service is inviting you to do, and join the conversation that way. You're welcome to head over to teachinginhighered.com and go to the podcasts page. And on that page, a lot of people don't realize you can search by guests there. So if there's a guest you'd like to hear, I mentioned James Lang's been on many times. His name came up. Stephen Brookfield, you can go way back in the back catalog. All kinds of wonderful guests. But there's also a taxonomy there. So you could go and browse by a topic that you're curious about. If what I said earlier about grades, for example, got you curious, there's a whole entire category waiting for you around grades. If you're interested specifically around artificial intelligence, I have been told that I have a unique catalog because I'm curious about all those very diverse perspectives. You're going to hear a lot of diverse perspectives, but head over to teachinginhighered.com/AI. And that page has a whole, the what they call above the fold, a whole bunch of resources, the best of the best, if you will, of podcasts and articles and resources and tools around artificial intelligence. And then there's a button at the top that will take you to all the episodes I've aired so far about artificial intelligence. I think I'm somewhere around 40, but I'm probably way off. But many. We'll say many. We'll leave it at that.
Well, again, the podcast that we strongly here recommend that you listen to is weekly and Teaching in Higher Ed. Dr. Stachowiak, thank you for being our guest on Speaking of Higher Ed.
Thank you, and thank you for these rich questions, and you're such a delightful interviewer. I had a wonderful time. I'm starting my day out well, and I just thank you for the experience.
Oh, thank you. Well, we're very glad you could be here.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Higher Ed. To extend your listening experience, we invite you to sign up for our Continuing the Conversation activity. This optional resource is designed to help you reflect on each episode and apply ideas in meaningful ways. You can find it, along with all episodes and show resources, on our show page at augusta.edu/innovation/SOHE. And continue the conversation with us at facebook.com/AUGCII. Speaking of Higher Ed is produced by the Center for Instructional Innovation at Augusta University.